Hi, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for February 6th, 2018, continuing our exploration of Midnight Cowboy, principally the movie, but I'm also going to talk about the book because I recently read it. Anyway, to set up sort of what I want to talk about here, when I was in grad school, everyone in my program was forced to take this class on basically dislodging the liberal idea of self or subjectivity from us, called core. And I didn't really particularly like the class. It was mostly irrelevant to why I went to grad school. And I didn't get a lot from it, but there was this one paper person that we studied. His name is Lacan. He's famous for this view of subjectivity called his mirror stage, and it's deeply influential in sort of like French and psychoanalysis. In the 40s and 50s, and the thing is, Midnight Cowboy, the movie, and a little bit in the book, but more so in the movie, uses a device where Joe ends up talking to himself using a mirror a lot. And given how this movie is sort of built around fractured subjectivity and alienation, having rewatched the film, I'm wondering, and I looked for almost 2 hours today, for any sort of commentary whether or not this was an influence. The timing works, where I'm wondering if either Hurley, who is the book author, or Salt or Schlesinger, screenwriter and director, were thinking of Lacan when they sort of built this movie. It's such an obvious and sort of a well-developed idea within the film that I feel like I should have used it as the film we watched when we discussed Lacan. Anyway, I'll get into what exactly the mirror stage is briefly towards the end of this. So this movie is a exploration of alienation, and that's how the film is very sort of pessimistic. And alienation, in this sense, it's not just being separate and lonely, separate from other people and lonely. It's specifically the sort of alienation we get because of living in a capitalist system. You are separate. You're forcibly separated or exploited in like traditional Marxism, because workers produce all the value, but the value they produce is less than their wages. And so you get separated from your labor is separated from you. The value of your labor is separated from you. So you get alienated from society because you're not getting a fair deal. And then also, because it's sort of the boxcars of the system, we end up being competitors with each other in terms of so the alienation, the separateness we get from other people is a direct consequence of the system we're in. So let me use sort of an example using baseball because it's Cubs and culture. Okay, so in baseball, the value of the TV deals, of the ticket sales, etc., it's all due to the players and manager. So if under so the value they bring to baseball is basically 100%. Now, not all baseball revenue is connected to the players per se. You have like concession or memorabilia, so it is a little bit about the team. So by far and large, people are fans of the sport because of the players. So they should get the lion's share of the money generated. Now, this isn't actually happening. They're only at about 30% of the revenue generated by baseball goes to the players themselves and the manager. And so in a sense, their effort, their labor of bringing baseball to people is being forcibly separated from their value. So they're getting alienated in that way. So that's sort of the first version. The second way in which is in terms of like players versus managers, owners. The player's natural ally isn't it's other players. Okay, so in the terms of like your business relationship or your economic relationship, the players are in a situation where like let me use Kyle Hendricks is in a weird sort of relationship to like Madison Bumgarner, who's a pitcher on the Giants, in that he is both a competitor and a cooperator. So in terms of like business, Hendricks' natural ally is Madison Bumgarner, because he's a player, and they're both sort of being systematically exploited, at least as far as the example is concerned. But in terms of like baseball, logic, or because they're in a sport where it's a zero-sum game where Hendricks does better if Madison Bumgarner does worse, they're in direct competition. And so it's sort of their natural ally in that sense is actually the owners, because the owners are always trying to build the best teams. And so in a weird way, because in the way of economic competition and sports competitions, baseball players in sort of a Marxist view are alienated from sort of their class interests because of how they're placed into the system where they're directly competing with each other. And they're sort of also alienated from their direct competition because of their class. So there's that dual separation or tearing of interests. And so it's that sort of alienation. And that's the main reason why Joe and Ratzo both sort of don't want to be all the characters, but especially Joe and Ratzo don't want to be working sort of stiff. It's why sort of Joe's fantasy or dream job is to be to be a sex worker, because the movie's kind of making the point that we're all sort of whores. It's just, or everyone sells their soul, and there's really no difference between what Joe is doing and what we all sort of do, because Joe is given the motivation because he was a dishwasher, and it's very clear he doesn't want to do that. So that's sort of like the main thing this movie is sort of dealing with, that sort of alienation, and it's profoundly moving. The way in which the separateness of every character is portrayed. Okay, let me kind of not fully get into that. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the mirror stage. Even though I'm using the word stage, it's not developmental. It just is this idea that selves or people, subjectivity is a complicated topic, but it's mostly about how human beings aren't, and sort of the enlightenment perspective of a human is that we know our desires, that we have sort of, if not perfect, but well-to-do self-knowledge, that we have sort of a concise control over our sort of autonomy and body, and we're not, and basically our psychology and physiology isn't messy. It's that we have, at least most of us, most of the time, a plausible amount of control, and there's sort of a unity that we have full, if not perfect, but passable self-knowledge. But we understand our drives, we understand our desires, and we have sort of a discrete or fully formed sense of self. Lacan's position, real briefly, is that's not true. It's the human beings are far too damaged and fucked up in that way, and they were sort of fundamentally fractured. Where at all moments and at all times we sort of have a ideal in our head that we can't ever actually be, that we can't ever have that we can't actually be this thing, this image, or this ideal, and So that's sort of like the one thing that we have this ideal, and on the other hand, we're sort of like just broken and messy, and we don't fully understand things, and we're just sort of bombarded with crap that we just can't fully control. And so the image you talk about, the mirror stage, is actually a very, where the name comes from, is a very small infant looking at him, looking at themselves in a mirror, where the subjectivity of the person is both it's the image in the mirror and the infant itself. And so on the one hand, the image in the mirror is the ideal, which the infant can't actually be, because it's too controlled and too discreet, and it's not messy. Whereas the infant, being an infant, is messy. Now that makes it sound like it's developmental, but it's not. It's at all sort of times we're sort of fucked up in this way, where we have ideals that we try to reach for or do, but because of being human, well, we just can't do it, because we don't really understand our drives or our desires, or we don't fully understand our own sort of senses ourselves. And human beings are so fractured and sort of broken in this way that our ideals are something we strive for and also torment us. And the other sort of point about this is, look, the Lacan mirror stage, because the way in which it's supposed to work is it's any sort of time. It's not just for like one individual, so you can have sort of like a mirror stage where two people in a relationship or a friendship have sort of an ideal friendship in their head, and then their friendship doesn't meet it because it's too messy. So you have a sort of a gap there. I'm bringing this up because, again, Joe looks in the mirror and he seems tormented by sort of this mirror image. And I really think if they weren't influenced by Lacan, Lacan is sort of the easiest way of talking about Midnight Cowboy. Okay, let me pause there.